This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
UConn versus Purdue tonight in the men's college basketball national championship game. We're going to break things down today, let you know all the value you can find at FanDuel Sportsbook for this game by talking to both Riley Thomas and Aidan Cotter, getting their read on this game in the markets at FanDuel Sportsbook and letting you know their favorite bets for tonight. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research. Joined here, as mentioned, by Riley Thomas and Aidan Cotter. You can find both those guys over at FanDuel Research. You can find Aidan on Twitter at Aidan Cotter FD. You can find Riley on Twitter at _Riley8. Riley, I'm going to start things off with you because, of course, we're talking about the national championship game for tonight, but also you're a Kentucky fan. So what we thinking today with the news that John Calipari is off to Arkansas?
Yeah, I think it obviously was surprising. Anybody leaving Kentucky for Arkansas was surprising, but it was a move that kind of had to happen. I think we saw the two growing apart. The success hasn't been there. Myself being a Kentucky fan, also speaking for the fan base, is, I think we were kind of getting tired of, just kind of disappointing every year. So I think it's a good move for both parties, and I'm excited to see who Kentucky can get. Hopefully they're going for a big name, but it had to happen. It was unavoidable.
Do you go to Kentucky message boards at all, or do you avoid it?
Oh man, that was a dark hole I went down to a couple years ago, and kind of just stayed away from it since, because there's just too much negativity, man. Fans are, I think, as you guys know as well, Kentucky fans are crazy. So you're seeing some crazy stuff on there. You
got to venture back there, at least for like this week, though. Like, have some fun. Like, let yourself indulge a bit, a little cheat day to check out the Kentucky message boards. I think you deserve that by this point.
Yeah, I'm expecting a lot of celebrating on there for sure. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, understandable. We've also got Aidan Cotter. As mentioned, you can find Aidan on Twitter at Aidan Cotter FD. Aidan, pretty fun matchup lined up for tonight. You were out at the women's Final Four, which sounds like it was a blast. You had some fun out there?
Oh yeah, it was awesome. I mean, that environment in Cleveland, I don't know. That was my second women's national championship game yesterday, and the last one was like in 2012. So just to see how far the game has come in the last 10, 15 years, just with the fans and just the play on the court. It was an electric environment. I wish the championship would have been a little closer towards the end, but I mean, it was so cool. The Iowa fans,
did you have a rooting interest for the final? I know you had a Paige Becker shirt on for the Friday game, which I appreciated because shout out Minnesota, but like any rooting interest for you for the final?
Not really. I was really just rooting for a good game. I had futures on South Carolina and Iowa from back in December, and so I was kind of in a nice spot either way. So it was nice to be able to just sit back and enjoy the game.
I guess I did get to still be happy because Tessa Johnson, also a Minnesota native, so therefore I didn't realize that, but I still got my Minnesota agenda off regardless. So thank you, Tessa, for allowing a Minnesotan to still win a national championship despite Paige Becker's losing in the Final Four. We're going to break down this men's national championship game for tonight from all angles, letting you know where Aidan and Riley see value for tonight at FanDuel Sportsbook in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast. Full week here on the show because, of course, we've got the Masters coming up this week. So Brandon Gadula will join me on Wednesday, breaking down special markets for Augusta, breaking down his favorite bets at FanDuel Sportsbook, and much more. Talking some baseball for tomorrow. We got UFC coming up later on this week. So a lot of good stuff here in the feed. Make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or over on Spotify. Say goodbye to that busted bracket. Don't worry about it anymore, but also you can bet on this national championship game at FanDuel Sportsbook along with all other games. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 you can use on point spreads, money lines, whatever it may be, Dinger Tuesday, etc., etc. Visit FanDuel.com and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets tonight. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only, $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, North Carolina, and Vermont. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700. Visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Now, before we talk the actual betting markets for this game, I did want to talk to both of you guys about your overall view of this matchup. So, Riley, let's start things off here with you. How do Purdue and UConn match up stylistically for tonight?
Yeah, so of course the big matchup that we're all going to talk about is going to be Donovan Clingan versus Zach Edey. I mean, how can you not? These guys they've been playing unbelievable. Edey just became the first player to record 20 points, 10 rebounds in 6 straight tournament games. And then you got Clingan on the other side. That's just, his defense has just been ridiculous. I mean, like the stats that came out of that Elite Eight Illinois game for Clingan were absurd. Illinois went 0 for 19 on shots contested by Clingan. When Clingan was on the court, Illinois scored only 14 points. So these guys are just like playing at an unreal level. Also, Evan Maya, he has these two players as the most valuable players in the country, and it's pretty much been that way all year long. You have Edey as a top player, and then you have Clingan leading in the defensive metric there. So, you know, they're both two teams that are basically built around their big men and how well they play and how they can defend the rim. So I think something that was really interesting that I saw that I guess I didn't quite realize until this point was both teams actually give up quite a bit of 2-point shots. And to me, that kind of says, you know, we have these dominant defensive guys on the inside defending our rim. You know, if you want to come in here and try to shoot at them, go for it, because you're probably not going to make it. It's a tough ask, but of course, they haven't really seen another center like they're about to see on the other side of the court. So I think that's going to be interesting. And then I think the big thing that I'm really interested to see too is how the backcourt matchup pans out, because UConn's backcourt is a lot bigger. You have Cam Spencer and Tristan Newton both standing at 6'4" and 6'5". And then Purdue's backcourt, of course, you have Braden Smith and Lance Jones at 6 foot and 6'1". So I think the size advantage for UConn for the backcourt is going to be interesting as well.
Yeah, so that'll be a lot of fun in addition to the Edey versus Clingan matchup. Aidan, what about for you? What stands out stylistically for UConn versus Purdue?
Yeah, like Riley said, I think the big man matchup is obviously going to be the headline grabber. I think I saw yesterday CBS Research had said something that this is the first time since Hakeem Olajuwon and Patrick Ewing played in the 84 championship that 2 7-footers have played at all in the NCAA tournament. And this is the first time we've ever seen 2 guys over 7'2" play in the tournament. And so that's going to get all of the headlines. I think for the most part, those guys are still going to get theirs. If Edey can get Clingan into foul trouble, obviously that's going to be a really big difference maker. But for me, it's the wings and the guard play is going to be the X factor. It's going to be what decides the game. I think, like you said, Braden Smith standing at 6 foot, 6'1". I think that might even be a little generous. I think we're going to see him. He's going to look small out there compared to those guys. And he's kind of been the biggest driving factor for their run this year and like how much better they've gotten. And so he even struggled in the semifinal game. He's had a couple turnovers, and we saw that last year when they lost to the 16 seed to FDU. He had 7 turnovers, and that's been something he's largely been able to stay away from this year. And so his ability to take care of the ball and limit the extra possessions that UConn gets, I think is going to be key to this game. And then for me, the biggest thing is Stephon Castle for UConn. He's one of their wings. He's a freshman. He's probably going to go the highest out of anyone in this game in the upcoming NBA draft, just because he's so big, he's so athletic, and he probably had his best game of the season in that Final Four win over Alabama. And so and we do see this a lot. Like these role players step up in the Final Four and just become such bigger factors. And if he is going to look like an actual NBA player in the championship, that gives UConn just such a big edge that Purdue's doesn't really have on the wing, that same caliber player.
And we're seeing that edge reflected here in the betting market. Where right now at FanDuel Sportsbook, UConn is favored by 6.5. That was actually 5.5 on the look-ahead line for the hypothetical matchup when they had these up before the Final Four. So, Aidan, some movement towards UConn here. Do you agree with that movement based on the matchups you were discussing, or is Purdue now evaluate this game at 6.5?
So if you look at a lot of like the top models that we're looking at when we try to examine these games, they all have this game like within 3 points. Like KenPom is at like 2.8, Torvik's under 3 as well. Like all of the analytics are saying that this game should be super close. And I think the line just reflects how much respect the market and the public has for UConn during this run. So I do think it's warranted, but man, it really just makes you want to take that 6.5 with Purdue. Like it's like they're begging you to take the Boilers.
Are you willing to do that? Will you take that bait, or are you personally inclined to pass and look elsewhere for your value for tonight?
Yeah, I think we'll get into some props a little bit later. And I think that's probably, if you want to play Purdue, I think that's going to be the way to do it, is to try to find some correlation where you can find a way for Purdue to cover, like what we're specifically looking at for them to get it within 6.5. But I don't know. I don't know if I can lay that 6.5 just by itself at -105.
I think that makes a lot of sense. What about for you, Riley? How are you viewing this one with the spread at 6.5?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I totally understand why this is at 6.5 for UConn. They've just been so dominant since last year, really. But both teams, they've covered every single game in this tournament. They're both 5-0 against the spread. And I'm in the same boat as Aidan here. I'm really having a hard time taking either side of this spread. I think it's tough because you see these models saying, oh, this is going to be a close game. You may see UConn win by 2 or 3. But then, you also break down the matchup and look at the backcourt difference, the wing difference, like Aidan was mentioning. And then you're kind of, oh, well, maybe UConn can get it. So I'm really torn on the spread.
Yeah. And the good thing is we've got a lot of markets, so you can happily pass if there is a market that you are not quite buying into. Total for this game is 145.5. Riley, down to 144.5. Any read for you on the total for this one?
Well, I was on the under, and then it's moved to 144.5 since, but I think I'm still comfortable going with the under. I'll still go for it. The under's 4-1, and Purdue's 5 games in the tournament. It's also hit in 3 straight games for Purdue in the tournament. The under's also 5-0 for UConn in this tournament. And I think for me, the biggest thing that I'm very, very interested in is how are these teams, especially Edey and Klingon, how are they going to shoot around the rim? Are they still going to be very efficient, even though they're seeing a defensive big man they haven't seen all year? I think that's going to be very telling, obviously, with how this total pans out. But just considering the trends for both teams this tournament, I'm still going to go with the under.
All right. How about for you, Aidan? Total now, again, 144.5. Any thoughts for you on that?
Yeah, both of these teams have not shot the 3 very well at all in this tournament, which makes me look a little nervous to continue to back that trend, especially Purdue was one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country during the regular season. And I think, like I was saying, if you want to back Purdue, I think you're going to be expecting it to be a little bit more high scoring game because they don't have quite the same level of defense as UConn. So I think it's like how you envision this game playing out. I am leaning towards Purdue keeping it close, but because of that, I would also think that it would go over. And so I think you see that a lot where the lines the spread correlates with the total with those teams. And I think that's especially true in this national championship. So slight lean towards the over, but I think that's a pretty fair number just based on what Riley said, what they've been doing of late.
And the good thing is you can use that intuition of, okay, if Purdue does wind up covering, I think that stylistically this game will play this way. You can consider that for stuff like same game parlays, which we'll discuss here in a bit, whether you see some value in those for tonight. But Aidan, you mentioned some player props and potentially buying into Purdue via that route versus buying in via the spread at 6.5. So when you look at the player prop market, any value for you stand out specifically there?
Yeah, for Purdue, 2 points props that I'm really looking at. I think right off the bat, just seeing Edey, I think he's dropped now to 23.5 this morning, which man, I know Klingon is so good, but just with how crazy his usage has been and how much he's been playing for a guy that big his last 3 games, he's played 38, 39, and 40 minutes. Like if he's going to be out there all 40 minutes, I find a really hard time, unless you think UConn is going to cover the spread and blow them out. I find it really hard to believe that Edey's not going to get up to 24 points. But the big one for me is Braden Smith's points. So I believe it is at 13 and a half. 10 and a half. Sorry.
Yeah.
10 and a half. He is, like I said, he's the X factor. Both of these teams with their big guys, they both run a lot of pick and roll, and defensively, because they have these monsters in the paint, they play drop coverage. So basically they're having their big guy just kind of sit and sink in the paint, and the guard's going to run over the top of the screen. And what that does is that opens up a lot of like mid-range shots and a lot of ways for the point guard to distribute or to get into the lane for a little runner. And Braden Smith's mid-range game has been really, really good this year. And that has me really liking that 10.5. I don't love that it's minus 130.
Sure.
I think we'll get into the same game parlays, but I think that would be a way to play the same game parlays for me, is to get into the Braden Smith points. But I think my favorite prop is the Tristan Newton for UConn over 15.5. Like I said, both teams play that drop coverage, and we haven't seen them play a guy like Edey quite of that caliber, but they have played Creighton twice, who has Ryan Kalkbrenner, who is another 7-foot big man, and they run a very similar style defense where Kalkbrenner wanted to stay in the paint and protect the rim, and Purdue's going to do the same thing. In those 2 games, Tristan Newton went for 27 and 16 points. He was over 15 shots in both of those games, and his scoring has been a little down in the last few games of the tournament, but he's a 5th-year senior, 6'5", big guard, and he's been their leading scorer all year. And we saw him score 19 in the championship last year when he was being guarded by some smaller defenders. And if Purdue's going to try to match up with him with Braden Smith or Lance Jones, who he's going to have that size advantage over, I really like his ability to be able to get into the paint and create his own shot. So I think that 15.5 is a really nice number for him.
Yeah, so Tristan Newton right now, FanDuel Sportsbook, over 15.5 is minus 115. Other ones Aidan mentioned there, Zach Edey over 23.5 points at minus 120, and then Braden Smith over 10.5 at minus 130. What about for you, O'Reilly? Where are you seeing value in the player prop market for tonight?
So Aidan is thinking the exact same way I am. I also love that Tristan Newton prop. That was the same one I'm on for all the same reasons that Aidan listed. Just the size advantage there, the way UConn plays. Newton gets a lot of good shot opportunities typically with the way they run their offense. Yeah, I mean, he scored 19 in last year's championship. I think this game could turn out, obviously not the same margin where it turns into a blowout to this degree, but I think this game could turn out similar to the San Diego State and UConn game in Sweet 16, where San Diego State's guards that's undersized kind of struggle to defend UConn's, which we saw in last year's national championship as well. So I think we could get in a similar boat there where you see UConn's guards be, like Aidan mentioned earlier, is the X factor, and this is the reason UConn comes out on top, is because their guards are just bigger and they're getting a lot of great shot opportunities. So I think another way you could ride that is going for Cam Spencer's three-point attempts or shots made. My bad. I think we could go for 2 maybe, and the odds aren't great there. Or wait, my fault. I'm at 3. I apologize. Gets too many shots for 2. Yeah, so 3 I think is a bit more realistic here. He shoots too much for 2 made threes. But same thing. I mean, he's probably going to be guarded by a smaller guard. You're probably going to get Jones or Smith on him, which are at 6'1" and 6 foot. Cam Spencer 6'4". Purdue also gives up quite a bit of 3-point shots. As Aidan mentioned earlier, though, neither one of these teams is really shooting the 3 well. So I think there is some risk involved there. Will UConn finally start making those threes? I think if anybody's going to do it, it's Cam Spencer, and he's facing a defense that is undersized on the perimeter, gives up a lot of 3-point shots, and that plus 132 looks great as well. So that's another one I like.
Okay, so the alignment was on Tristan Newton over 15.5 points. That's a minus 115. And then Riley wanted to add in there Cam Spencer, 3+ made threes. That is plus 132. Now, what we'll do now is I'm going to give both you guys a single same-game parlay you can put out for the game. And your favorite same-game parlay you can build over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Riley, let's kick things off with you. If you're building one same-game parlay for this game, which legs are you including within that?
So if I was to build a same game parlay, I am just going to continue to give UConn the respect. And I guess if I'm going to take a side, it's going to be on UConn. They've been rolling all tournament. They did it last year too. So I would be on their side when building this. I would go for a UConn cover. I'd go with the under as well. And then I would just do the same two props that I mentioned as well. So the over 15.5 for Tristan Newton, and then the 3 made threes for Cam Spencer.
All right. So if you were to pair all of those together, that would wind up. We can't include the 3 made threes in there. But if we do with the without that, just the UConn -6.5, under 144.5, Tristan Newton over 15.5 points. That is plus 538 right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. And like you said, they all do kind of play well together outside of the under with the points prop there, but you just kind of make the assumption that this leans towards a UConn game. And as Aidan was talking about before, a UConn game may lend itself towards the under. So Riley wants UConn -6.5, under 144.5, Tristan Newton over 15.5 points. That is plus 538. What about for you, Aidan? You're filling out a single same game parlay for this game. Which legs are you including in that?
So this is fun. So Riley will give everyone a nice little UConn same game parlay, and then I kind of went the other direction with more of a Purdue same game parlay. So to start with, that 6.5 still scares me, but if we're gonna start to correlate it with some of these extra legs, I don't mind getting into some of the alternate spreads. So alternate spread 3 is plus 10.5 for Purdue. And I think that is something I can get behind if I'm backing that up with some extra legs here. So we start with Purdue plus 10.5, and then going back to Braden Smith's points over 10.5, and then just taking the over 144.5. And so kind of the opposite line of thinking as Riley, but the same logic, where if I think Purdue is going to keep it close or within 10 points, I think Braden Smith's going to have a big game, and I do think Purdue is going to have to score and make UConn keep up with their offense and make it more of a high scoring game. And so I think that even it's not quite as juicy as the plus 500, but even at plus 264, that is something I feel a little more comfortable with rather than just laying that plus 6.5.
So some more flexibility there by getting the Purdue plus 10.5 there for the alternate spread. So Aidan is going with Purdue plus 10.5, Braden Smith over 10.5 points, over 144.5. That is plus 264 at FanDuel Sportsbook for that. And again, kind of leaning into, okay, if I envision Purdue covering plus 10.5, what things do I expect to be more likely to occur? You expect Braden Smith to play a key role in this game and for it to be a higher scoring game than we see otherwise, going back to what you said initially there. So again, just trying to identify legs that play well together. And if I assume this bet hits, which other bets are thus more likely to hit as a result of that? So I think both those are pretty fun and different views of this game. Any final thoughts for you, Aidan, before we close up shop for today?
I don't think so. I think this could be one of the best national championships we've had in quite a few years. And I am just super excited that we all get to enjoy this. And for the sake of viewership, I really hope Purdue covers the spread and we get a nice game.
What about for you, Riley? Any parting thoughts for us before we close out the 2023-2024 men's college basketball season?
Well, it's been a fun one. I think the tournament hasn't featured the Cinderellas as much as we wanted, but in the end, we're getting probably the best national championship we could hope for. So I'm really hoping that this ends up being a great game. And, I would be happy if Purdue covered because I want a great game here. I don't want a repeat of 2021 where you had Baylor and Gonzaga and it just kind of was not what we hoped for. So I have high hopes. I think this could be a great one.
Want to close things out in a high note. Well, I appreciate both of you for joining me throughout this year to talk about some betting. I appreciate the time you've made for the show. It's been fun to have both of you on here. Find Aidan Cotter on Twitter at Aidan Cotter FD. Find Riley Thomas on Twitter at _Riley8, and find both their work over at FanDuel Research. A lot of other good stuff from them beyond just college basketball as well. I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. You can follow FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread to get all our shows as they go live here on the feed. If you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also find the show on the FanDuel YouTube page and FanDuel TV Plus. Enjoy the basketball for tonight. Hopefully you had a blast in a profitable tournament as well. We'll talk to you all once again tomorrow to break down another Dinger Tuesday at FanDuel Sportsbook. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.